Carina Black. Hello, thank you so much for being here. This is an amazing event. Our agency resettles refugees. We assist those seeking asylum, those victims of political and religious persecution, and victims of trafficking. My message to you is very simple. It's first that what we are experiencing today, the onslaught of this government on its people, is nothing but an ongoing attack on families of color. And secondly, that our country is built exactly on the strength of those families. We don't live in unprecedented times in our country's history. During the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, we had many laws and norms that discriminated against everyone who is non-white. And if you look back on these different forms of discrimination, they typically focused on dismantling the family unit. So what is happening today at the border to our sisters and brothers from Central and Latin America is nothing new. But we tend to forget these things because we were under the false impression that we had moved on. This country has implemented laws and regulations that hindered certain minority groups from fulfilling their economic and political potential. But we thought we had learned from those lessons, and we thought we had moved on. The first settlers to this country decimated Native American communities by destroying their way of life, by pilfering their land, and later on, the government took over. Thank you, Ray. The government took over by splitting up children from their families to take them to government boarding schools. When we placed half of our indigenous brothers and sisters onto reservations and gave them reparations, we thought we had moved on. This country tore slave families apart, ripped their children from their mothers, and sold them to different slave owners, causing entire generations, until today, to suffer from family disintegration, mental trauma, and ongoing violence in our African American communities. And then we elected an African American president, and we thought we had moved on. So over the past couple of decades, we really thought we had moved on. The United States became a global leader in fighting disease, in trying to establish rule of law in the developing world, in investing in technology and education in girls in Africa and Latin America. Our efforts in combating HIV and AIDS, for example, has saved over 14 million lives over the last 15 years. We are good enough as a country to do all those things around the world. We lifted entire countries out of poverty, and our efforts in empowering Africa have reduced the poverty rate on that continent by 30%. We also opened our borders to allow immigrants from Mexico, Central, and Latin America to work in our fields and to take all the jobs Americans can't or don't want to do. We created special programs for the best and brightest from the developing world to enter into a lottery and come to our country. We offered scholarships for the finest students from everywhere to create the most powerful economy in the world. Since 1975, we also resettled more people than any other country in the world, about 3.5 million people over the past 30 years. And our global engagement was considered good for the global economy and for our economy. In other words, we thought we had moved on. In Central and Latin America, where during the 19th and 20th centuries, we had either occupied or invaded just about every single country, we began to focus on helping police force to treat those who are imprisoned in a more humane fashion. We invested in education for girls and women and in technology and infrastructure. We thought we had moved on. So let me repeat, these are not unprecedented times. We have been through this before, and in fact, most of this country's history, there has been an attack on the non-white family unit. And guess what? Our brothers and sisters of color have and will continue to thrive. Their determination to make a better future for their lives is evident all around us. How do we know this? Statistics show that Latinas, for example, now have the fastest growth of college attendance, and they do it with the lowest amount of college debt. Latinos in the United States have the fastest growing purchasing power of any undocumented people. and they create more businesses here in Nevada than any other group. The real issue is, once their political power is unleashed, that is what is really scaring this administration. So while we do not live in unprecedented times in terms of attacking the non-white families, we do have more weapons at our disposal today than at any time in history. What are these weapons? Most importantly, the power to educate, the ability to disseminate information, to allow everyone to make up their own opinion about how they want to combat the onslaught on our families. We can combat the racist and discriminatory action of this government. All we have to do is stand together with families from all nationalities. This is who we are as a country. This is who we are as a community right here in Reno. And this is what's going to persevere over the long run. We can move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Carina. Before I introduce the next speaker, everyone who is holding a clipboard with voter registration forms on it, raise those up. Listen to me. The only thing that we can do is the first step in this long process is to make sure you are registered to vote. So if you